The crystal chandeliers of the Metropolitan Arts Foundation cast dancing shadows across the polished marble floors as Emma Rosen stood quietly in the corner of the grand ballroom. Her hand rested protectively on her 7-month pregnant belly. The emerald green maternity gown she wore worth more than most people earned in a year. Yet despite the luxury surrounding her, Emma felt like a ghost drifting through someone else's dream. Her husband, Vincent Sterling, stood across the room surrounded by admirers and business associates. He was tall and commanding, his designer suit perfectly tailored, his smile bright and practiced. To everyone watching, they were the perfect couple. The successful real estate developer and his beautiful, expecting wife. Nobody saw the cracks beneath the polished surface. Emma had learned to make herself small at these events. Vincent preferred it that way. She was meant to look elegant, smile graciously, and above all, never draw unwanted attention. Tonight, she had already failed at the last part. It started innocently enough. Emma had been admiring a contemporary sculpture when Richard Blackwood, a real estate investor known for his excessive drinking, approached her. His words were slurred, his gestures too familiar as he made inappropriate comments about her pregnancy. Emma tried to politely excuse herself, but Blackwood blocked her path, his hand reaching toward her arm. Before Emma could retreat, an elderly gentleman stepped between them. He was distinguished-looking, perhaps in his late 60s, with silver hair and calm, steady eyes. He spoke with quiet authority that made Blackwood stumble backward and disappear into the crowd. "Are you all right, Mrs. Sterling?" the gentleman asked gently. Emma recognized him as Theodore Grant, though she had only seen him from a distance at previous events. He was well respected in business circles, though he kept a low profile. "Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate your help." Theodore smiled kindly and excused himself, but the damage was already done. Across the room, Vincent's eyes had narrowed dangerously. He had witnessed the entire exchange, and Emma knew from the set of his jaw that he was furious. The remainder of the gala passed in agonizing slow motion. Vincent ignored her completely, laughing too loudly with his associates, his body language radiating cold anger. When he finally signaled it was time to leave, Emma's stomach twisted with dread. Their driver, an older man named Peterson, whom Emma had never really noticed before, held the door of the black luxury sedan open. The rain had started during the gala, a spring storm that turned the city streets into rivers of light and shadow. Emma settled carefully into the leather seat, her designer shoes already damp from the brief walk to the car. Vincent climbed in beside her, and the partition between the front and back seats slid up, creating a private cocoon. For several blocks, he said nothing. The silence was worse than his anger. Emma could feel it building like pressure before an explosion. "Do you have any idea what you did tonight?" Vincent's voice was low and controlled, which somehow made it more frightening than if he had shouted. "Vincent, I did nothing wrong. That man was inappropriate, and Mr. Grant was simply being kind." "Kind?" Vincent turned to face her, his handsome features twisted with contempt. "You made me look like a fool. My wife needs to be rescued by Theodore Grant of all people. Do you know who he is? Do you understand what that looks like?" Emma's hands trembled in her lap. "I was being harassed." "What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to handle it without causing a scene? Everything about you tonight was wrong. The way you stood, the way you drew attention to yourself, the way you allowed another man to defend you." His words were sharp as broken glass. "You are my wife, Emma. You represent me. And tonight, you were an embarrassment." Tears stung Emma's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. 7 months pregnant, exhausted, and now being berated for being the victim of harassment. This was her life now, so different from the simple happiness she once knew. "I want to go home," she whispered. Vincent leaned forward and tapped sharply on the partition. "Peterson, pull over." The car glided to a stop along a quiet side street. Rain hammered against the windows. The city lights blurred through the water, streaming down the glass. Emma's heart began to race. "What are you doing?" she asked, fear creeping into her voice. Vincent reached across her and unlocked her door. Cold, wet air rushed into the warm interior. "You want independence? You want to embarrass me and make your own decisions? Then get out. Find your own way home." Emma stared at him in disbelief. "Vincent, I'm 7 months pregnant." "It's pouring rain," I said. "Get out." His voice was ice. "Maybe a walk in the rain will teach you some humility. Maybe it will remind you how lucky you are to have the life I've given you." "Please," Emma whispered, her hand instinctively protecting her unborn child. "Please don't do this." But Vincent was already pushing her door wider. "Out. Now." Tears mixing with rain, Emma stumbled from the car onto the wet pavement. Her expensive shoes offered no traction on the slick sidewalk. The door slammed shut behind her with a finality that echoed through the empty street. Through the rain-blurred window, Emma watched Vincent gesture angrily at the driver. She expected the car to pull away, leaving her stranded. Instead, something unexpected happened. The driver's door opened, and Peterson stepped out into the rain. He walked calmly around to Vincent's door and opened it. Emma could hear raised voices, Vincent's incredulous and commanding, Peterson's low and firm. Then, impossibly, Vincent climbed out of his own car. He stood on the sidewalk, gesticulating wildly at Peterson, but the older man remained unmoved. Finally, with a curse that carried through the storm, Vincent turned and stalked away down the street, disappearing into the rain and darkness. Peterson approached Emma slowly, removing his jacket and draping it over her shaking shoulders. The warmth was immediate and comforting. "Come, my dear," he said gently, his voice carrying an accent she had never noticed before. "Let's get you somewhere dry and safe." He guided her to the front passenger seat, treating her with a care and dignity that made her want to weep with relief. Once he was back in the driver's seat with the heat running at full blast, Emma finally found her voice. "Why did you make him leave?" "He's your employer." Peterson, or whoever he really was, met her eyes in the rearview mirror. In them, Emma saw depths of kindness, and also something else. Sadness, determination, a fierce protectiveness. "Vincent Sterling is not my employer, Emma. He never was. I work for someone else. Someone who made a promise long ago to always watch over you." Emma's breath caught. "I don't understand." The man pulled the car smoothly into traffic, heading away from the gleaming towers of downtown toward a quieter neighborhood Emma didn't recognize. "My name is not Peterson," he said quietly. "It's Theodore Grant, and I've been waiting a very long time to tell you the truth about who you really are." The world Emma thought she knew began to crack and crumble. Washed away by the rain like a watercolor painting left out in the storm, Theodore drove through the rain, soaked streets with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going. Emma sat in silence, her mind racing with questions that tumbled over each other like stones in a river. The elegant townhouse they arrived at was nestled in a historic neighborhood, its warm lights glowing through tall windows that promised sanctuary. A kind-faced woman in her 50s met them at the door. "Mrs. Sterling, I'm Margaret. Please, come inside and let's get you into some dry clothes." Within minutes, Emma found herself wrapped in soft cashmere, seated in a library that smelled of old books and wood smoke. A fire crackled in the hearth, chasing away the chill that had settled deep in her bones. Theodore sat across from her, his expression gentle but serious. "I need to tell you about your father," Theodore began, his voice carrying the weight of years of silence. "James Harrison was not just a brilliant art teacher, Emma. He was also my closest friend and business partner." Emma's father had died when she was only 10 years old, a car accident that had shattered her world. Her mother had always told her that they lived comfortably because of smart investments James had made. They had never been wealthy, just secure enough for Emma to attend good schools and pursue her passion for art. "We started a company together 30 years ago," Theodore continued. "Harrison and Grant Technologies. Your father had the vision, the creative genius, that saw possibilities where others saw obstacles. I had the business acumen and the capital to make those visions reality." He stood and walked to a painting on the wall, a landscape that Emma recognized immediately. Her father had painted it. When James died, it destroyed me. He was like a brother. In his final hours at the hospital, he made me promise something. He made me swear that I would always protect you and your mother, that I would be your guardian angel even if you never knew it. Emma's hand trembled as she touched her belly, feeling her baby move. "My mother never mentioned any of this. Your mother Rebecca was a proud woman. She loved your father deeply, but she had her own ideas about wealth and happiness. Theodore returned to his seat, his eyes meeting hers with understanding. She accepted the trust fund I established from James's share of the company, but she insisted on living modestly. She wanted you to have a normal childhood, to find your own path, without the burden or corruption of extreme wealth. I watched you grow up from a distance, Theodore said softly. I made sure your schools were excellent, that opportunities appeared when you needed them. I attended your college graduation from the back row. I was so proud of the woman you became, just as James would have been. Emma felt tears streaming down her face. Then why did you let me marry Vincent? If you were watching over me, why didn't you stop it? Pain flashed across Theodore's weathered face. I hoped I was wrong about him. I ran background checks. I knew he was ambitious and ruthless in business, but I thought perhaps love would change him. I thought perhaps you saw something in him that I couldn't. By the time I realized how he truly treated you, you were already pregnant. I couldn't just swoop in and destroy your marriage without cause. Until tonight, Emma whispered. Till tonight, Theodore agreed, his voice hardening. What he did tonight was unforgivable. Throwing his pregnant wife out into a storm like garbage, that crossed every line. He walked to an antique desk and retrieved a leather portfolio, placing it on the coffee table between them. Emma, your mother passed away 2 years ago. The terms of the trust changed upon her death. You were supposed to receive full access to your inheritance on your 30th birthday, but there was an emergency clause. If you were ever in danger or dire circumstances, the funds would be released immediately. Emma opened the portfolio with shaking hands. The documents inside were dense with legal language, but certain numbers jumped out at her. Numbers with so many zeros, they seemed impossible. Don't understand. She breathed. Harrison and Grant Technologies became one of the largest software development companies in the country, Theodore explained gently. We hold patents on systems used in everything from smartphones to medical devices. Your father's 50% stake, which became yours, is currently valued at approximately $5 billion. The room spun. Emma gripped the arms of her chair, trying to process what she was hearing. $5 billion. While she had been tiptoeing around Vincent, terrified of his anger, afraid she had nowhere to go and no resources. She had actually been one of the wealthiest women in America. Vincent has no idea, she said slowly. Vincent has a net worth of perhaps $80 million. And most of that is leveraged debt against properties he doesn't truly own, Theodore said with grim satisfaction. He's been treating a billionaire like a penniless dependent. The irony would be amusing if it weren't so tragic. Emma thought of all the times Vincent had reminded her that she had nothing without him, that he had elevated her from her simple life as an art teacher. The manipulation, the control, the constant erosion of her self-worth, all built on a foundation of lies. What do I do now? Emma asked, her voice steadier than she expected. Now, Theodore said, pulling out his phone. We call Catherine Moore. She's the best divorce attorney in New York, possibly in the country. She's represented everyone from tech billionaires to Hollywood royalty, and she owes me a favor. Within an hour, Catherine Moore arrived at the townhouse despite the late hour. She was a striking woman in her 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an aura of absolute competence. She listened to Emma's story without interruption, her expression growing colder with each detail. This is going to be very simple, Catherine said, when Emma finished. We have documentation of abuse. We have witnesses to tonight's incident. And most importantly, we have leverage. Vincent Sterling's entire empire is built on perception and credit. If that perception crumbles, so does everything else. She laid out her strategy with military precision. First, we file for divorce immediately. We cite irreconcilable differences and request full custody with no visitation rights. Based on his endangerment of you and your unborn child tonight. Second, we offer him a deal. He walks away cleanly, gives up all parental rights, and we let him keep whatever he can salvage of his business. If he fights us, we destroy him. How? Emma asked. Theodore smiled, and it was not a kind expression. Vincent's car has security cameras. Front, back, and interior. Everything that happened tonight was recorded in crystal clear high definition. Audio and video of him throwing his 7-month pregnant wife out of a car into a rainstorm. We also have resources he can't imagine, Catherine added. Theodore and I have connections throughout the financial world. We can call in debts, trigger clauses, and create market pressures that will collapse Vincent's house of cards in a matter of days. But we'll only do that if he refuses to go quietly. Emma thought about the man who had controlled and diminished her for 3 years. The man who had convinced her she was nothing without him. She thought about her baby, growing strong inside her, deserving so much better than a father like Vincent Sterling. I don't want his money, Emma said firmly. I have my own. I want him to have no legal right to my child. I want him to understand what he threw away, and I want to make sure he can never do this to anyone else. Catherine's smile was fierce and approving. Then that's exactly what we'll do. Over the next week, Emma stayed in Theodore's guest house, surrounded by comfort and genuine care for the first time in years. Margaret fussed over her like a mother hen, making sure she ate properly and rested. A doctor came daily to check on the baby. Slowly, Emma began to remember what it felt like to breathe freely. The legal papers were delivered to Vincent by courier. Catherine's team had moved with impressive speed, compiling evidence and preparing documents. The initial filing was straightforward, almost boring in its legal language, but attached was a private letter from Catherine that laid out the reality of his situation. Theodore had already begun making phone calls. Not threats, just quiet conversations with the right people. Banks that held Vincent's commercial loans. Investors who held shares in his developments. Business partners who depended on the perception of his success. The whispers started immediately. Vincent Sterling might not be as solid as he appeared. His wife had left him. There were recordings of concerning behavior. Perhaps it was time to be cautious. Emma watched it unfold with a strange sense of detachment. This wasn't revenge, exactly. It was simply the truth catching up with someone who had built everything on lies and illusion. Vincent had taught her that image was everything. Now, he was learning that lesson from the other side. On the 8th day, Catherine called with news. He's accepted the terms. Full surrender of parental rights, uncontested divorce. He keeps his assets such as they are. He signed everything this morning. Emma closed her eyes, feeling a weight lift that she hadn't fully realized she'd been carrying. It's really over. It's really over, Catherine confirmed. You're free, Emma. You and your baby are free. Vincent Sterling sat in his penthouse office, staring at the papers spread across his glass desk. The divorce documents mocked him with their cold legal language. He had signed them in a moment of panic, convinced that fighting would lead to total destruction. Now, looking at the financial reports from his accounting team, he wondered if destruction was coming anyway. The phone calls had started 3 days after Emma disappeared. His primary lender at National Commerce Bank, requesting a meeting to discuss his loan portfolio. His largest investor suddenly concerned about market conditions. His business partner on the Chicago development, asking pointed questions about cash flow. At first, Vincent dismissed it as coincidence. Then the pattern became impossible to ignore. Someone was systematically dismantling his empire, pulling threads that made the entire tapestry unravel. He knew who. Theodore Grant. The man had resources that made Vincent's wealth look like pocket change. And Vincent, in his arrogance, had thrown that man's goddaughter out of a car in the rain. The stock in Sterling Properties, which traded publicly, began a steady decline. 15% the first week, 25% the second. Investors were spooked by rumors they couldn't quite source but couldn't quite ignore. Vincent's carefully constructed image of unstoppable success was cracking. His social circle evaporated overnight. Invitations stopped coming. Friends stopped returning calls. The same people who had laughed at his jokes and sought his approval now crossed the street to avoid him. In New York's elite circles, failure was contagious. The worst part was not knowing exactly what evidence existed. The letter from Catherine Moore had mentioned recordings, but provided no details. Vincent lay awake at night, replaying that evening in the car, wondering exactly what the cameras had captured. His words. His contempt. The moment he pushed Emma's door open and ordered her into the storm, he tried calling Emma repeatedly. Every call went to voicemail. He sent messages that grew increasingly desperate, then angry, then desperate again. All went unanswered. She had vanished completely, protected by forces he couldn't touch. 3 weeks after Emma left, Vincent's chief financial officer requested an emergency meeting. The news was catastrophic. 2 of their major developments were being foreclosed on. The banks had called their loans, citing material changes in risk assessment. Without those properties, Sterling Properties was insolvent. How is this possible? Vincent demanded, though he already knew the answer. His CFO, a nervous man named Gerald, wouldn't meet his eyes. The covenants in the loan agreements gave the banks discretion. Someone convinced them to exercise that discretion. We're leveraged too heavily to survive this kind of coordinated attack. Vincent's empire, built on borrowed money and borrowed credibility, collapsed in slow motion over the following weeks. Properties were sold at auction for fractions of their supposed value. Investors sued. Employees jumped ship. The media, which had once fawned over him, now wrote gleeful articles about his downfall. Through it all, Emma remained invisible and untouchable. Vincent had no idea where she was, though he imagined her laughing at his destruction. He had no concept that Emma wasn't laughing at all. She was simply living. Emma gave birth on a clear morning in June, surrounded by people who truly cared for her. Theodore sat in the waiting room with Margaret, pacing nervously like the surrogate grandfather he had become. Catherine stopped by with flowers and a trust document establishing a foundation in James Harrison's name, dedicated to supporting art education for underprivileged children. The baby was a girl. Emma named her Grace Rebecca Harrison after her grandmother. She had her mother's dark hair and her grandfather's gentle eyes. When Emma held her daughter for the first time, she felt a joy so pure it washed away the last shadows of her marriage. Theodore visited every day. Bring in gifts and stories about James. Your father would have spoiled this little one terribly, he said, holding Grace with the careful reverence of someone who understands how precious life truly is. Emma had moved into a comfortable brownstone in Brooklyn, far from the cold perfection of Vincent's penthouse. She decorated it herself with warm colors and her father's paintings. She set up a nursery that felt like a sanctuary, filled with books and soft light. Her life became beautifully ordinary. She took Grace for walks in the park. She joined a new mothers group where nobody knew or cared about her wealth. She started painting again, something she hadn't done in years, creating colorful, abstract pieces that reflected her emotional journey. The money sat quietly in accounts, managed by Theodore's people. Emma used some of it to establish the foundation Catherine had suggested. She donated anonymously to causes she believed in. But mostly, she lived simply. Discovering that the life her mother had wanted for her had been the right one all along. 6 months after Grace's birth, Emma ran into someone from her old life at a coffee shop. Jennifer, a woman who had attended the same charity events, someone Emma had considered almost a friend. Jennifer's eyes widened in recognition, then slid away uncomfortably. I heard about, well, everything. How are you managing? Emma smiled, Grace sleeping peacefully in her carrier. I'm wonderful, actually. Really, truly wonderful. Jennifer glanced around the modest coffee shop, clearly expecting signs of hardship. If you need anything, if things are difficult, I could maybe help with contacts for jobs or something. It was kindly meant, but based on such wrong assumptions that Emma almost laughed. That's sweet, Jennifer, but I'm good. Better than I've ever been, honestly. As Jennifer left, still looking confused, Emma realized that her old world would never understand. They saw the divorce, the scandal, the loss of Vincent's money and status. They didn't see freedom. They couldn't imagine that she had gained infinitely more than she'd lost. Theodore stopped by that evening with dinner and news. Vincent filed for bankruptcy last week. Sterling Properties is being liquidated. He's not destitute. He managed to hide some assets offshore. But his empire is gone. He's moving to Florida, trying to restart with what he's salvaged. How do you feel about that? Theodore asked carefully, watching Emma's face. Emma looked at Grace, asleep in her bouncer, tiny hands curled into fists. I feel grateful, she said honestly. Grateful that he's gone, grateful that Grace will never know him, grateful that I escaped. I don't wish him well, but I don't wish him harm either. He's just not relevant to my life anymore. Theodore nodded approvingly. That's very wise. Your father would be proud of the woman you've become, Emma, the strength you've shown. I had help, Emma said, reaching out to squeeze his hand. I had someone watching over me, just like Dad promised. As summer turned to fall, Emma began teaching art classes at a community center, working with kids who reminded her of her younger self. She painted in the evenings while Grace played on a blanket nearby. She made real friends. People who valued her for herself rather than her connections or status. On Grace's first birthday, Emma hosted a small party in her garden. Theodore and Margaret were there, along with Catherine and a few of Emma's new friends from the Mothers Group. It was nothing like the lavish events of her married life. It was better as Grace smashed her face into birthday cake. Her laugh ringing through the garden, Emma felt a completeness she had never experienced in Vincent's world. This was real. This was love. This was the life her father had worked to give her, the life her mother had protected, the life Theodore had helped her reclaim that night. After everyone left and Grace was asleep, Emma stood in her studio looking at a new painting. It showed a woman walking through rain toward light, carrying something precious. It wasn't subtle, but it was honest. Her phone buzzed with a message from Theodore. Thinking of you and Grace tonight? James would be so happy to see how beautifully you've created your life. Sleep well, goddaughter, Emma smiled, feeling the truth of those words settle into her heart. Vincent had thrown her out into the storm, believing he was punishing her, believing he held all the power. He had no idea that he was actually setting her free. The rain had washed away the lies, the false life, the gilded cage. What remained was truth, strength, love, and a future that belonged entirely to Emma and her daughter. Bright and boundless and beautiful. She turned off the studio light and went to check on Grace one more time before bed. Her daughter slept peacefully, safe, and loved, dreaming whatever dreams babies dream. Emma touched her soft hair gently. We're going to be just fine, sweet girl, she whispered. Better than fine. We're going to be extraordinary. And in the quiet of that moment, the rain beginning to fall softly outside and her daughter breathing steadily beside her, Emma knew it was true. The storm had passed, and she had emerged not just surviving, but truly, finally, completely alive. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to click like. Share this story with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more meaningful stories.